On New Year's Eve, Billionaire CEO Isabella Grant was turned away from an exclusive restaurant where her reservation mysteriously didn't exist. As whispers and laughter spread through the dining room, she prepared to leave in quiet humiliation. Then a black single father dining with his young daughter did something unexpected. He stood up and waved her over to share his table. What seemed like a simple act of kindness would soon trigger a corporate conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything Isabella had built. Because what no one in that room knew was that she hadn't been turned away by accident. She'd been tested, and the stranger who just saved her was about to reveal a truth that would change both their lives forever. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The city glittered like a jewelry box turned upside down. Fireworks burst over the waterfront in brilliant cascades of gold and silver, their echoes rolling through the downtown streets where limousines and town cars lined up bumper to bumper. Inside restaurants and hotels, champagne flowed freely. Laughter spilled through glass doors. Couples embraced under twinkling lights strung between buildings. Everyone had somewhere to be on New Year's Eve. Everyone belonged somewhere. Isabella Grant stepped out of her black sedan onto the rain-slicked sidewalk and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The deep red evening dress beneath caught the streetlight for just a moment before disappearing again into shadow. Her driver offered a brief nod before pulling away, leaving her alone on the corner. Around her, the sounds of celebration rose like a wave. Music thumped from nearby venues. Groups of friends hurried past, arms linked, voices bright with anticipation. She stood perfectly still, watching the restaurant ahead through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the dining room blazed with warm light. Crystal chandeliers cast soft patterns across white tablecloths. Men in dark suits raised glasses. Women in evening gowns leaned across tables, laughing at jokes she couldn't hear. It looked like a painting of happiness, carefully arranged and perfectly lit. Isabella had been featured on the cover of 3 major business magazines this year alone. Her face had appeared on financial news networks around the world. She ran a tech and finance empire worth billions, employed thousands of people, and had been called one of the most powerful women in the country. Yet here she stood completely alone, watching strangers celebrate through glass. She took a breath and walked toward the entrance. The doorman opened the heavy glass door with a practiced smile. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of expensive wine and roasted garlic. Isabella stepped inside and immediately felt the shift. Conversations continued, but eyes flickered toward her. A few heads turned. Recognition rippled through the space like a stone dropped in still water. She ignored it and approached the host's stand, where a young woman in a black dress looked up with a bright, professional expression. "Good evening. Welcome to Belmont." The host's smile was perfect, rehearsed. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes." Isabella Grant. 8 o'clock. The host tapped on her tablet, scrolling through the list. Her smile held. Then it wavered. She scrolled again, slower this time, her eyes narrowing slightly. She looked up at Isabella, then back down at the screen. Her fingers moved faster now, searching. "I'm sorry, could you repeat the name?" "Isabella Grant." The host's cheeks flushed pink. She tapped the screen again, her movements growing more urgent. "Just one moment, please." She turned and hurried toward the back, disappearing through a doorway marked private. Isabella stood at the host's stand, acutely aware of the eyes on her now. A couple waiting near the bar whispered to each other. A man in a gray suit glanced over his shoulder, then leaned toward his dinner companion. She kept her face neutral, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She had learned long ago not to show discomfort in public. Never let them see you uncertain. Never let them see you hurt. A manager emerged from the back, a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and a pinched expression. He approached the host's stand with the host trailing behind him, her face tight with anxiety. The manager offered Isabella a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Grant, I'm terribly sorry for the confusion." His voice was smooth, controlled. "I've checked our system twice, and unfortunately, I'm not finding your reservation in tonight's bookings." Isabella kept her voice steady. I made the reservation 3 weeks ago. I received a confirmation email. I understand, and I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. He folded his hands in front of him, the gesture practiced final. However, as you can see, we're fully booked this evening. New Year's Eve is our busiest night of the year. Without a confirmed reservation in our system, I'm afraid there's simply nothing I can do. I have the confirmation on my phone. I'm sure you do, ma'am. But our system is what we rely on, and if it's not in the system, we have no record of it. He glanced past her toward the door, already dismissing her. I'd be happy to call a few other establishments in the area to see if they have availability. Isabella felt the weight of the room pressing against her back. More people were watching now. She could feel their stares like pinpricks on her skin. Someone behind her whispered something, and laughter followed, quickly stifled. A man seated near the window raised his glass to his companion and said, just loud enough to carry, "Guess money can't buy everything." More laughter, soft and cruel. The manager's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, perhaps, or maybe just indifference. He was already looking past her, toward the next problem, the next task. Isabella had built a fortune by reading people. She knew when someone was lying. She knew when they were hiding something. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this man was looking at her like she didn't matter. "No, thank you," she said quietly. "That won't be necessary." She turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The sound felt too loud, too exposed. Every step echoed. Behind her, conversations resumed. The moment passed. She was already forgotten. But as her hand reached for the door, something stopped her. Not a sound, not a word, just a feeling, sharp and sudden, like a thread pulling tight in her chest. This restaurant wasn't just any restaurant. It was a place she and David had come every New Year's Eve for 7 years. The place where he'd proposed, down on one knee beside table 12, while the entire dining room erupted in applause. The place where they'd celebrated every major milestone, every victory, every quiet moment when the rest of the world felt too loud. David had been gone for 3 years now. A car accident on a wet road. Sudden, senseless, final. And this was the first year she'd come here alone. She hadn't come for status. She hadn't come to be seen. She'd come because the thought of starting another year in her empty penthouse, surrounded by silence and expensive furniture, felt unbearable. She'd come because this place held memories, and memories were the only thing that made her feel less alone. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears come. Not here, not in front of these people. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold night air. Behind her, inside the warm glow of the restaurant, life continued. But in a quiet corner near the back, away from the spotlight and the noise, sat a man most people didn't notice. Caleb Wright sat at a small table tucked against the far wall, his dark suit clean and well-fitted but unremarkable. He wasn't trying to stand out. He never did. Beside him, his daughter, Ava, carefully folded her napkin into a triangle, her small hands precise and deliberate. She wore a purple dress with white flowers embroidered along the hem, and her hair was pulled back into 2 neat braids. She looked up at her father with bright, curious eyes. "Daddy, why is that lady leaving?" Caleb had been watching. He'd seen the whole thing unfold. The confusion at the host stand. The manager's dismissive tone. The whispers spreading through the room like wildfire. He'd seen the woman's face, the way she held herself together, even as the room turned cold around her. "She doesn't have a table," Caleb said quietly. Ava frowned. "But there's lots of people here. Someone could share." Caleb looked down at his daughter. She was 7 years old, but she understood things most adults missed. Kindness, fairness, the simple truth that no one should be left standing alone. "You're right," he said softly. He watched as the woman reached for the door, watched as her shoulders tensed, watched as she stepped toward the exit, her head held high, even though he could see the pain in the way she moved. His jaw tightened. Ava whispered, "Daddy, we have extra space." Caleb looked at his daughter. Then he looked back at the woman, and something inside him made a decision before his mind caught up. He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, and the sound cut through the dining room like a knife. Conversations softened. Heads turned. People looked. Caleb stood. He didn't say anything, didn't announce himself. He simply raised his hand, calm and steady, and looked directly at the woman near the door. And he waved her over. The room went silent. The manager, who had been returning to his station, froze mid-step. His eyes widened. He hurried toward Caleb, his voice low and urgent. "Sir, I'm sorry, but this area is reserved. You can't just—" Caleb didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the manager and said, "She can have my seat." The manager blinked. "That's not how this works." "Then I'm not giving it away." Caleb's voice was calm, steady. "I'm sharing it." Isabella stood by the door, her hand still on the handle, staring across the room at this stranger. A black man in a simple suit, standing beside a little girl in a purple dress, offering her something no one else in this room had offered. A place to belong. Ava scooted her chair inward and smiled at Isabella. "You can sit here. Daddy always leaves space." Isabella's breath caught. Every instinct told her to leave, to walk out with her dignity intact, to refuse this act of pity from a stranger. But something else whispered beneath the noise. Something quieter, lonelier. She let go of the door. She walked across the dining room, her heels clicking softly now, her heart pounding in her chest. Every eye in the room followed her. Phones lifted subtly. Whispers grew louder. A billionaire being invited to sit with a stranger. On New Year's Eve, this would be a story people told. But Isabella didn't care anymore. She reached the table and met Caleb's eyes. They were steady, kind, and completely unafraid. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." He pulled out the chair across from him, and Isabella sat. Ava beamed at her, and for the first time all night, Isabella felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. Caleb sat back down and folded his hands on the table. "I'm Caleb. This is my daughter, Ava." Isabella. He didn't react to her name, didn't acknowledge her fame, didn't ask what she did or why she was alone. He simply nodded and said, "Nice to meet you." Ava leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands. "Do you like sparkling cider? They have really good sparkling cider here." Isabella smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. "I haven't tried it yet." "You should. It's almost as good as the real stuff, Daddy says." Caleb's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. "That's what I tell her." A waiter appeared, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Caleb simply asked for another glass and another setting. The waiter hesitated, glanced toward the manager, then nodded and hurried off. Isabella looked around the table. It was small, tucked away from the main flow of the dining room. The lighting was softer here, quieter. It wasn't the kind of table powerful people fought over. It wasn't meant to be seen. "This is a nice spot," she said. Caleb shrugged. "Ava likes it. She says the corner is cozy." "It is cozy," Ava confirmed. "And you can see everyone, but they can't really see you." Isabella glanced at the little girl, surprised by the observation. "That's very smart." Ava grinned. "Daddy says I'm perceptive." "She is," Caleb said quietly. The waiter returned with the glass and silverware, setting them down with a stiff professionalism that barely concealed his confusion. As he left, Isabella found herself relaxing, just slightly. The tension that had coiled around her spine began to loosen. "So," Caleb said, his voice easy, conversational, "what brings you here tonight?" Isabella hesitated. She could lie. She could give the polished, practiced answer she gave to journalists and board members. But something about this man, about the way he looked at her without expectation, made her tell the truth. "I used to come here with my husband. Every New Year's Eve." Her voice was soft, careful. "This is the first time I've come alone." Caleb's expression shifted, just slightly. Understanding. Not pity, just quiet recognition. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Thank you." Ava looked up at her father, then at Isabella. "My mom died when I was really little." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Caleb's hand tightened slightly around his glass, but his face remained calm. "She did. I don't remember her much," Ava continued, her voice matter-of-fact in the way only children can be. "But Daddy says she was really nice. And funny." She was, Caleb said softly. Isabella felt something twist in her chest. A sharp, unexpected ache. She looked at this man, this stranger, and saw something she recognized. Loss. The kind that didn't go away. The kind you just learned to carry. I'm sorry, Isabella said. Caleb met her eyes. Thank you. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the restaurant swirling around them. But at this small table, in this quiet corner, the world felt smaller, more manageable. Ava broke the silence by asking Isabella about her dress, which led to a conversation about favorite colors, which led to Ava explaining her theory that purple was the best color because it was both calm and exciting at the same time. Isabella found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time that night. Caleb watched his daughter with quiet affection, occasionally adding comment, but mostly letting Ava lead the conversation. He had an easy presence, calm and unhurried. He didn't fill silences with nervous chatter. He didn't perform. He just was. Isabella realized, with a strange jolt, that she couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her like this. Like a person, not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a symbol of power or success. Just a woman sitting at a table on New Year's Eve. So what do you do, Caleb? Isabella asked, genuinely curious now. Caleb smiled faintly. I take care of my daughter. And Isabella prompted. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And I fix complicated problems people pretend can't be fixed. Isabella raised an eyebrow. What kind of problems? The kind that live in shadows. It wasn't a real answer, but something in his tone told her it was all she'd get for now. She didn't push. Instead, she found herself studying him more closely. The calm confidence. The way people passing by their table occasionally glanced at him, then quickly looked away. The way the manager had backed off the moment Caleb stood his ground. This man wasn't just kind. He was something else entirely. Across the room, a sharply dressed man in a charcoal suit sat at a premium table near the window. He had been watching Isabella since she walked in, and now his eyes lingered on Caleb. His smile faded. He set down his glass and leaned back in his chair, his mind working through calculations Isabella couldn't see. Back at the small corner table, Ava told a story about a bird that had landed on their apartment balcony that morning. She described it in elaborate detail, complete with sound effects and hand gestures. Isabella laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that surprised her. Caleb watched her, his expression unreadable. You have a beautiful laugh, he said quietly. Isabella looked at him, startled. Thank you. You should use it more often. Something in his voice made her throat tighten again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. The waiter returned with their meals, and they ate together, the conversation flowing easily now. Ava asked Isabella questions about her favorite foods, her favorite places, her favorite books. Caleb added his own observations, thoughtful and precise. And slowly, without Isabella realizing it, the loneliness that had been pressing against her chest all night began to lift. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. As the evening wore on and midnight approached, the restaurant grew louder. Champagne bottles popped. Music swelled. People gathered near the windows to watch the fireworks. But at the small corner table, time moved differently. Isabella looked at Caleb and Ava and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Gratitude. Thank you, she said again, her voice quiet but firm. For this. For tonight. Caleb met her eyes, and for a moment, she saw something deeper there. Something she couldn't quite name. You're welcome, Isabella. And in that moment, as the world prepared to count down to a new year, Isabella Grant realized that the most powerful thing she'd received all night wasn't a table. It was kindness from a stranger who saw her not as a billionaire, but as a woman who didn't want to be alone. Isabella had shared a meal with Caleb and Ava, finding genuine laughter and connection at their corner table. As midnight approached, the mystery surrounding Caleb deepened, and Isabella began to realize this kind stranger was far more than he appeared to be. The restaurant hummed with anticipation now. Waiters moved quickly between tables, refilling champagne flutes and clearing dessert plates. Somewhere near the bar, someone started playing soft jazz on a piano. The melody wove through the conversations, gentle and unhurried. Isabella found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. The tension that normally lived in her shoulders had eased. Her breathing felt deeper, easier. Ava was telling another story, this one about a class project where she'd built a model city out of cardboard and tape. Her hands moved through the air as she described the tiny buildings and streets, her eyes bright with pride. Isabella listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Ava's smile grow wider. Caleb watched them both, his expression calm but attentive. He reminded Isabella of still water, the kind that ran deeper than you could see. "So you want to be an architect?" Isabella asked. Ava scrunched up her nose, thinking, maybe, or maybe I'll build computers. Daddy says computers are just tiny cities where information lives. Isabella glanced at Caleb. That's a beautiful way to explain it. She asks a lot of questions, Caleb said with a slight smile. I try to give her answers that make sense. Do you work with computers? Isabella asked, still trying to piece together what this man actually did. Sometimes. Depends on the problem. It was another non-answer, polite but deliberately vague. Isabella found herself growing more curious. Most people, when they learned who she was, either wanted something from her or wanted to impress her. Caleb seemed to want neither. He spoke to her like an equal, but there was something beneath his calm exterior. Oh wait, a history. Before she could ask another question, a man stumbled toward their table. He was in his 40s, red-faced and loud, his tie loosened and his jacket hanging open. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and used the other to steady himself against a nearby chair. His eyes swept over their table with casual cruelty. Well, he slurred, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. Isn't this sweet? The nanny gets a table. Isabella stiffened. Ava's smile faded, but Caleb didn't move. He simply looked up at the man, his expression unchanged. The drunk man laughed, pleased with his own joke. What's the matter? Boss lady finally letting the help sit down? He gestured vaguely at Caleb, then at Isabella. Or is this one of those charity things? Rich people love their charity cases on the holidays. A few nearby diners looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with barely concealed interest. Isabella felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. She opened her mouth to speak, but Caleb's voice cut through first. You should go back to your table. The words were quiet, calm, but something in Caleb's tone made the drunk man's smile falter. He straightened slightly, suddenly less sure of himself. I'm just making conversation, the man said, but his voice had lost its edge. Caleb held his gaze, silent and steady. The seconds stretched. The drunk man shifted his weight, uncomfortable now under that unwavering stare. Something passed between them, something Isabella couldn't quite name. Authority, warning, the kind of presence that didn't need to be loud to be felt. The drunk man cleared his throat. Whatever. Happy New Year. He turned and walked away, moving faster than his drunkenness should have allowed. He didn't look back. Isabella exhaled slowly. That was rude. Ava finished, her small voice matter of fact. Yes, Isabella agreed. Caleb picked up his water glass and took a sip as if nothing had happened. Some people forget their manners when they drink. But Isabella had seen what happened. The shift. The way the drunk man had backed down without argument. It wasn't just confidence. It was something deeper. Something practiced. You handled that well, she said carefully. Caleb shrugged. No point in making a scene. Ava tugged on her father's sleeve. Daddy used to work in places where people were mean all the time. Caleb's hand gently covered his daughter's. Ava, you did. Ava insisted. You told me you had to deal with difficult people. That's true, Caleb said, his voice patient. But we don't need to talk about that tonight. Isabella caught the deflection, the gentle steering away from whatever Ava was about to reveal. Her curiosity sharpened. What kind of places? Caleb met her eyes. For a moment, she thought he might deflect again, but something in his expression shifted, as if he'd made a decision. Big companies, government agencies, places where the stakes were high and people played dangerous games. What did you do for them? Solve problems they couldn't solve themselves. What kind of problems? Caleb paused, choosing his words with care. The kind where money and power collide, where people hide things they shouldn't, where the truth gets buried under layers of paperwork and silence. Isabella felt something click in her mind. You were a consultant. Something like that. But not anymore. No, not anymore. Ava looked up at her father, her expression serious beyond her years. Mommy died and everything changed. The table went quiet. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of emotion crossing his otherwise calm face. He looked down at his daughter with something that might have been pain or love or both. Yes, he said softly. Everything changed. Isabella felt the weight of those words. She understood them in a way most people wouldn't. When David died, her entire world had fractured. The life she'd built, the future she'd imagined, all of it had disappeared in an instant. She'd thrown herself into work because work didn't ask questions. Work didn't remind her of what she'd lost. But it also meant she'd stopped living. She'd stopped feeling. I'm sorry, Isabella said quietly. Caleb nodded, accepting the condolence without comment. Then he looked at her with those steady eyes, and she felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and strangely comforting. Some worlds aren't safe for children, Caleb said. So I walked away. That must have been difficult. It was necessary. Before Isabella could respond, another man approached their table. This one was different. Sober, well-dressed in an expensive navy suit. His approach was deliberate, measured. He stopped a respectful distance away and addressed Caleb directly. Mr. Wright. Caleb looked up, his expression unreadable. Mr. Brennan. The man, Brennan, nodded politely. His eyes flicked to Isabella for just a moment, recognition sparking there, before returning to Caleb. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. It's New Year's Eve, Caleb said simply. Everyone deserves to celebrate. Brennan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I just meant, it's been a while since you've been in circulation. I prefer it that way. I'm sure you do. Brennan glanced around the restaurant, his gaze sweeping across the other diners before settling back on Caleb. There are a lot of people here tonight who remember what you did. Some who still owe their careers to you. Their lives even. Caleb's expression remained neutral. That was a different time. Was it? Brennan's voice dropped slightly. Some debts don't expire, Mr. Wright. Isabella watched this exchange with growing fascination. The dynamic between these two men was complex, layered with history she didn't understand. Brennan spoke to Caleb with a mixture of respect and caution, as if he were addressing someone dangerous, someone important. I'm not here for business, Caleb said firmly. I'm here with my daughter. Brennan's eyes softened slightly when he looked at Ava. Of course. I apologize for the interruption. He straightened and nodded to both Caleb and Isabella. Enjoy your evening. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd near the bar. Isabella sat back in her chair, processing what she'd just witnessed. Friend of yours? She asked. Former colleague. He seemed careful around you. Caleb took a sip of his water. People remember what they want to remember. And what do they remember about you? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The restaurant buzzed around them, loud and alive. But at their table, the world felt very small and very quiet. They remember I was good at finding things people try to hide, Caleb said. Secrets, money, evidence, the truth. Isabella's pulse quickened. You were an investigator. I was a lot of things. And now I'm a father. Caleb's voice was final, a door closing. That's all that matters. Ava, who had been listening quietly, suddenly perked up. Daddy ran really big operations. He told me once that he used to help stop bad people from hurting companies. Caleb's hand moved to his daughter's shoulder, gentle but firm. Ava, that's enough. But it's true, Ava insisted. It is, but some stories are for another time. Isabella felt pieces clicking into place. The calm authority, the way people looked at him, the vague descriptions of his past work. This man wasn't just some consultant or investigator. He'd operated at a level most people never even knew existed. The kind of work that happened in boardrooms and government offices where billions of dollars and powerful reputations hung in the balance. You scared that drunk man without touching him, Isabella said quietly. Caleb met her eyes. I didn't scare him. I just reminded him that some tables aren't worth approaching. And how did you do that? Experience. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice low. What did you really do, Caleb? He was quiet for a long moment, weighing something she couldn't see. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured and deliberate. I ran covert operations for corporations and governments. Risk assessment, threat extraction, counterintelligence. When someone powerful wanted to destroy a company or steal proprietary information or bury evidence of wrongdoing, people call me to stop it. He paused. Or sometimes, people call me to do those things for them. The admission hung in the air between them. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine, but not from fear. From recognition. She lived in a world where power moved in shadows, where fortunes were built and destroyed by people most of the world never heard of. She'd always suspected that world had another layer, deeper and darker. And now she was sitting across from someone who'd lived in it. Why did you stop? She asked. Caleb's expression hardened, just slightly. Because my wife was killed. A robbery, they said. Wrong place, wrong time. His voice was flat, controlled. But 6 months later, I found evidence it wasn't random. Someone wanted me to know they could reach me, that they could hurt what I love. Isabella's breath caught. Ava looked down at her hands, her small fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. So I disappeared, Caleb continued. Changed our lives. Moved to a different city. Started over. Because the only thing that matters to me is sitting right here. He looked at his daughter with fierce, protective love. And I will never let that world touch her again. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. She understood, in that moment, what it meant to lose everything and choose to rebuild with only the pieces that mattered. She'd lost David and buried herself in work. Caleb had lost his wife and buried himself in his daughter. 2 different paths. Same pain. I'm sorry, she whispered. So am I. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared grief settling over the table. Around them, the restaurant grew louder. Midnight was approaching. People were gathering near the windows. Champagne corks popped. Laughter rose like fireworks. But Isabella barely noticed. Her mind was racing. Caleb had run operations like the ones she'd only heard whispers about. He'd moved in circles of power and danger. And now he was here at this quiet corner table, living a simple life with his daughter. Except he'd just helped her tonight. A woman turned away at the door. A woman he'd recognized. You knew who I was, Isabella said suddenly. Caleb didn't deny it. Yes. When? The moment you walked in. Isabella's pulse quickened. Then why did you help me? Caleb looked at her, his eyes steady and honest. Because you were alone. And no one should be alone on New Year's Eve. That's the only reason. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. No. Then what? Caleb glanced at his daughter, then back at Isabella. Because a long time ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. When I was drowning and didn't think I'd make it out. His voice softened. A woman running a tech startup gave me a second chance. Hired me when no one else would. Saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Isabella's heart stopped. When was this? 12 years ago. I was just out of a failed government contract. No differences. No future. I walked into a small office in a converted warehouse and asked for work. Any work. Caleb's eyes never left hers. The CEO interviewed me herself. She didn't ask about my credentials. She asked me what I believed in, what I was willing to fight for. Isabella's mind reeled backward through the years. 12 years ago, she'd been building her first company, a tiny tech startup focused on financial software. She'd been hungry, driven, desperate to prove herself. She'd interviewed dozens of people in those early days. What did you tell her? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told her I believed people deserved to know the truth. That power without accountability was just tyranny in a suit. Caleb smiled faintly. She hired me on the spot. Said I was the first person who'd given her an honest answer. Isabella remembered. God, she remembered. A young man with sharp eyes and quiet intensity. He'd worked for her for 6 months, doing security analysis and risk assessment. He'd been brilliant, meticulous, and then one day he'd left. A better opportunity, he'd said. She'd wished him well and moved on, buried under the avalanche of building an empire. That was you, she breathed. That was me. I didn't recognize you. I was younger. Different. Caleb's expression softened. But I never forgot what you did for me. You gave me a foundation when I had none. You taught me that integrity could exist in business. That power didn't have to corrupt. Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks now, hot and unchecked. I barely remember. You wouldn't. You helped a lot of people. Caleb's voice was gentle. But you changed my life. And tonight, when I saw you turned away, alone, I thought maybe it was time to return the favor. The restaurant roared around them. Someone shouted that it was 5 minutes to midnight. Champagne bottles appeared on tables. Music swelled, but Isabella couldn't move. She sat frozen, staring at this man who had once been a stranger, then an employee, then a ghost from her past, and now something she couldn't quite define. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "You're welcome." Ava looked between them, her young face serious. "Daddy says you should always help people who helped you, even if they don't remember." Isabella reached across the table and gently squeezed Ava's hand. "Your daddy is very wise." Ava beamed. "I know." The moment broke, softened by the little girl's pride. Isabella wiped her eyes and laughed, a sound caught between tears and joy. Caleb watched her with quiet understanding, and for the first time all night, Isabella felt something other than loneliness. She felt connection, purpose, hope. But then Caleb's expression changed. Subtle, but Isabella caught it. His eyes shifted, focusing on something past her shoulder. His jaw tightened. The easy warmth in his face cooled into something harder. "What is it?" Isabella asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was staring at a man across the room, the same sharply dressed observer who had been watching them earlier. The man in the charcoal suit who sat by the window. He was looking directly at their table now, his expression unreadable. "Do you know that man?" Isabella asked, following Caleb's gaze. "No," Caleb said slowly. "But he knows you." Isabella studied the man more carefully. Mid-40s, elegant suit, expensive watch. He looked like 100 other executives she'd met over the years. Polished, successful, forgettable. "I don't recognize him," she said. "You should." Caleb's voice had taken on a different quality now. Sharper, more alert. "He's been watching you all night. And he's been watching me." A chill ran down Isabella's spine. "Who is he?" "I don't know yet. But I will." The countdown began. People throughout the restaurant started shouting numbers. 10, 9, 8. Isabella's heart pounded. The warmth and safety of the past hour suddenly felt fragile, threatened by something she couldn't see. 7, 6, 5. Caleb leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Isabella, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." 4, 3. "What is it?" 2. Caleb's eyes locked onto hers. "Your company is about to walk into something dangerous." 1. The restaurant erupted. Cheers exploded. Champagne sprayed. Fireworks burst outside the windows in brilliant cascades of color and light. People kissed and hugged and shouted Happy New Year with wild abandon. But at the small corner table, Isabella and Caleb sat in absolute stillness. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked, her voice barely audible over the celebration. Caleb's expression was grave. "You have enemies inside your own boardroom." Isabella's blood turned cold. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been tracking financial patterns for the past year. Ghost transactions, shell companies, money moving through networks that shouldn't exist." Caleb's voice was steady, factual. "It all leads back to your company. And it all started 6 months ago." "That's impossible." "I would know." "Would you?" Caleb interrupted gently. "When was the last time you personally reviewed acquisition contracts? Vendor agreements? Offshore holdings?" Isabella opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was, she hadn't looked at those details in months. She had people for that. Trusted executives, lawyers, accountants. "They already made their first move tonight," Caleb continued. "What move?" "Turning you away from this restaurant." Isabella's mind spun. That was just a mistake. A reservation error. "No." Caleb's voice was firm. "This restaurant's parent company was quietly acquired 2 months ago. The new controlling interest traces back to shell corporations connected to your own holdings. Someone inside your company orchestrated this. That doesn't make sense. Why would someone? To test you. Caleb leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. To see if you'd fight back. To see if you'd make noise. To see if you still had allies. He paused. You didn't. You walked away quietly. Alone. That told them everything they needed to know. Isabella felt the room tilting. Fireworks flashed outside, painting the restaurant in shifting colors. Red, blue, gold. But all she could see was Caleb's face, deadly serious, telling her things that couldn't be true. Except they felt true. 3 executives from her original inner circle had died in the past 6 months. Accidents, they said. A car crash. A fall. A sudden heart attack. She'd mourned them, attended the funerals, and moved on because that's what you did. You kept moving. But what if they weren't accidents? Why are you telling me this? Isabella whispered. Because I've been tracking the same network that killed my wife. And it keeps leading back to your company. Caleb's eyes burned with quiet intensity. Someone is using what you built as a weapon. And they're doing it from the inside. The celebration continued around them, oblivious. People danced. Couples kissed. The new year had arrived, full of hope and promise. But Isabella felt like she was drowning. I don't know who to trust, she said, her voice breaking. I know. Caleb reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The touch was warm, solid, real. That's why I'm telling you now. Because you need to know what's coming. What's coming? Caleb's jaw tightened. A war. And you're standing right in the middle of it. Isabella pulled her hand back, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. A few nearby people glanced over, but the moment passed quickly. She needed air. She needed space. She needed this to not be real. But Caleb stood too, his expression understanding. Ava looked up at both of them, worried. I know this is a lot, Caleb said quietly, but I wouldn't tell you if it wasn't urgent. How do I know you're telling the truth? Isabella asked, her voice sharp with fear and anger. How do I know this isn't some elaborate con? You show up, play the hero, tell me my world is falling apart. Because I have proof, Caleb said simply. Financial records, communications, patterns that would take your lawyers months to find. He pulled a small card from his pocket and held it out to her. Call me when you're ready to see it. Isabella stared at the card. Plain white. A phone number. Nothing else. And if I don't call? Caleb's expression was sad. Then you'll find out the hard way. And by then, it might be too late. The man in the charcoal suit stood from his table across the room. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward them, weaving through the celebrating crowd with purposeful grace. Isabella's pulse spiked. Who is he? She asked again. I'm about to find out. The man reached their table and smiled, polite and cold. Up close, Isabella could see his eyes were gray, calculating. He looked at her first, then at Caleb, then back to her. Ms. Grant, he said smoothly. What a pleasure. I'm Marcus Hade. Isabella's breath caught. She knew that name. Marcus Hade, board strategy advisor. He'd been brought on 8 months ago by her CFO. High-level consulting. Corporate restructuring expertise. Mr. Hale, she said carefully. Marcus's smile widened. I'm surprised to see you here tonight. I heard there was some confusion with your reservation. It was handled, Isabella said, her voice cool. I'm glad. Marcus's eyes slid to Caleb. And I see you've made new friends. How fortunate. Caleb stood very still, his expression unreadable. But Isabella could feel the tension radiating from him, coiled and ready. Mr. Hale, Caleb said quietly. Have we met? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. No. Strange. You seem familiar. I have one of those faces. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Perhaps. He turned back to Isabella. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, Ms. Grant. The new year is going to be very interesting for all of us. He walked away before Isabella could respond, disappearing into the crowd near the exit. She watched him go, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. He knows, she whispered. Yes, Caleb agreed. He knows. What do I do? Caleb looked down at Ava, who was watching them both with wide, worried eyes. He touched his daughter's shoulder gently, reassuringly. Then he looked back at Isabella. "You weren't turned away from this restaurant," he said, his voice low and steady. "You were tested, and now they know you're vulnerable. Isolated. Alone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Isabella looked at the card in her hand. At Caleb, at Ava, at the celebration continuing around them. All these people starting a new year with hope and joy while her world crumbled beneath her feet. She thought about David, about the life they planned, about the empire she'd built, about everything she'd sacrificed to get here. And she made a choice. "I'm going to fight," she said quietly. Caleb nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Good, because they're counting on you not to." Isabella slipped the card into her purse. Around them, the celebration reached a crescendo. The new year had begun, and with it, everything had changed. She looked at Caleb one more time. This stranger who wasn't a stranger. This man who had saved her twice in one night, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Isabella had just learned the devastating truth. Her company was under attack from within, and the restaurant incident was a deliberate test. Caleb had revealed his dangerous past and warned her that enemies were already moving against her. As the new year began, Isabella faced a choice between running or fighting back. The celebration continued around them, but Isabella felt disconnected from it all. Champagne bubbles caught the light. Voices rose in toasts and laughter. Couples swayed to music that seemed too cheerful, too bright. She stood beside the small corner table, still holding Caleb's card, her mind racing through everything he'd just told her. Marcus Hale had walked away moments ago, his polite smile carrying an unmistakable threat. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Caleb gathered Ava's coat from the back of her chair and helped his daughter slip her arms through the sleeves. The little girl looked tired now, her earlier energy fading as the late hour caught up with her. She leaned against her father's side, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders protectively. Isabella watched them, struck by the tenderness of the gesture. Here was a man who'd operated in shadows, who'd fought battles most people never knew existed, and his entire world centered on this small child. "You should go home," Isabella said quietly. "Get some rest. I'll figure this out." Caleb looked at her steadily. "You can't figure this out alone. I've built an empire alone. I think I can handle this." "That's what they're counting on." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "They've spent months isolating you, removing your allies, making sure you had no one to turn to. If you try to handle this by yourself, you'll walk straight into their trap." Isabella wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. She thought about the past 6 months, the deaths, the way certain executives had grown distant, the meetings she hadn't been invited to, the decisions made without her input. She'd attributed it to normal corporate evolution, the natural shifting of power as companies grew. But what if it had been deliberate? What if every step had been calculated? "What do you suggest?" she asked finally. "Meet me tomorrow. Bring nothing electronic. No phone, no tablet, nothing they can track." Caleb pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote an address on a napkin. 2 o'clock. Come alone. Isabella took the napkin, studying the address. It was in an older part of the city, away from the business district. What's there? Safety. And answers. Caleb glanced toward the exit where Marcus had disappeared. Right now, they think you're vulnerable and alone. Let them keep thinking that for one more day. And then we show them they made a mistake. Ava tugged on Caleb's hand. "Daddy, I'm sleepy." "I know, sweetheart. We're leaving now." He looked at Isabella one more time. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Isabella nodded. "I'll be there." Caleb guided Ava toward the door, his hand resting on her small shoulder. Isabella watched them go, this mysterious man and his daughter, and felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. She'd spent years building walls around herself, protecting her heart from further loss. And in one night, a stranger had walked through those walls as if they didn't exist. She looked down at the napkin in her hand, then slipped it into her purse alongside Caleb's card. Around her, people continued celebrating, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just shifted beneath her feet. Isabella made her way to the exit, declining offers from the valet and choosing to walk despite the cold. She needed to think, needed to process. The city streets were alive with revelers, people stumbling between bars and restaurants, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Car horns honked in celebration. Somewhere in the distance, more fireworks exploded, painting the sky in temporary brilliance. She walked for 20 minutes before finally hailing a cab. As she slid into the back seat and gave her address, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. She looked tired, older than her 42 years. The confident CEO the world knew had cracks showing, visible even in the dim interior light. Her penthouse was dark and silent when she arrived. She kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine, then stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched out before her, each one representing lives being lived, choices being made, futures being shaped. Somewhere out there, people were plotting against her, using what she'd built, threatening everything she'd worked for. She thought about calling someone, a lawyer, a security consultant, someone from her board she still trusted. But Caleb's words echoed in her mind. They've spent months isolating you. How could she know who was safe? How could she know who was compromised? Isabella didn't sleep that night. She sat in her living room, watching the sky gradually lighten from black to gray to pale blue. When her phone started buzzing with New Year's messages, she ignored it. She showered, dressed in casual clothes, and forced herself to eat breakfast despite having no appetite. At 1:30, she left her building through the service entrance, wearing sunglasses and a simple coat that didn't draw attention. She took 2 different cabs, switching between them to make sure no one followed. Caleb's caution had infected her, made her see threats in every shadow. The address led her to a converted warehouse in an industrial neighborhood. The building looked abandoned from the outside, its brick facade weathered and worn. But when Isabella approached the side door, it opened before she could knock. A woman stood there, mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an athletic build. She wore jeans and a dark sweater, nothing that suggested corporate polish or professional distance. "Ms. Grant?" the woman asked. "Yes. Come in. They're waiting for you." Isabella followed the woman inside, her heart pounding. The interior was nothing like the exterior suggested. Clean white walls, modern lighting, computer equipment arranged on tables. Several people worked at various stations, their attention focused on screens displaying data and charts Isabella couldn't decipher from a distance. Caleb stood near the back of the room, studying something on a large monitor. He turned when Isabella entered, and his expression softened slightly. "You came," he said. "You knew I would. I hope you would. There's a difference." Caleb gestured around the space. "This is my team, or what's left of it." The woman who'd let Isabella in extended her hand. "Sarah Beaumont. I used to run financial forensics for the SEC." A younger man with dark skin and neat cornrows looked up from his computer. "Travis Coleman, former NSA data analyst." An older man with gray hair and tired eyes nodded from across the room. "James Patterson. I was a federal prosecutor until I asked the wrong questions about the wrong people." Isabella looked at each of them, then back at Caleb. "What is this?" "People who disappeared from powerful places," Caleb said quietly. "People who saw things they weren't supposed to see, who asked questions they weren't supposed to ask, who threatened systems designed to stay hidden. And now you work together?" "We survived together," Sarah corrected. "Most of us would be dead if we'd stayed in our old lives." The weight of that statement settled over Isabella like a heavy blanket. These people had given up careers, identities, safety, all because they'd gotten too close to something dangerous. "What did you find?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb pulled up a chair for her. "Sit down. This is going to take a while." For the next hour, they walked Isabella through a financial web so complex it made her head spin. Shell companies nested inside shell companies. Money flowing through offshore accounts. Transactions disguised as legitimate business dealings. And at the center of it all, buried under layers of legal complexity, was her company. It started 18 months ago, Travis explained, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he pulled up documents. Small acquisitions. Companies you probably approved without much thought. Consulting firms. Tech startups. Service providers. I approve dozens of acquisitions every year, Isabella said. Exactly. That's what they counted on. Travis highlighted several entries on the screen. But these companies weren't what they appear to be. They were fronts. Ways to move money into your corporate structure without raising red flags. Sarah took over, spreading printed documents across the table. Once inside your system, they started shifting resources, redirecting investments, creating new divisions that existed only on paper, building a parallel financial structure inside your legitimate empire. Isabella studied the documents, her trained, eye-catching irregularities she should have noticed months ago. Why didn't our auditors catch this? Because your auditors were replaced, James said grimly. 6 months ago, your CFO recommended a new auditing firm, said they were more efficient, more cost-effective. Isabella remembered. She'd signed off on it without question, trusted her CFO's judgment. That firm is owned by the same network running this operation, James continued. They're not finding problems. They're hiding them. And the 3 executives who died? Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Caleb pulled up photos on another screen. 3 faces Isabella knew well. Richard Hayes, her first VP of operations. Linda Morrison, who'd helped build her initial investor network. Thomas Webb, who'd been with her since the beginning. They figured it out, Caleb said quietly. Richard noticed the irregularities first, started asking questions. He died in a car accident 3 weeks later. Linda and Thomas both started digging after that. Linda fell from her apartment balcony. Thomas had a sudden heart attack. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes. They were my friends. I know. Caleb's voice was gentle. That's why they had to die. Because they were loyal to you. Because they would have warned you. Why didn't they come to me before they died? Sarah and Caleb exchanged a glance. Finally, Sarah spoke. They tried. Each of them tried to schedule meetings with you. Private meetings. Urgent meetings. Isabella's blood ran cold. I never got those requests. Exactly. Your assistant filters your calendar. Your assistant was replaced 4 months ago. The room tilted. Isabella gripped the edge of the table, fighting down nausea. Every layer of protection she'd thought she had, every person she'd trusted to guard her interests, had been systematically compromised. She'd been walking through a trap for months, blind and confident. Who's behind this? She asked hoarsely. Caleb pulled up a photo on the main screen. A man in his 60s, distinguished, with silver hair and a warm smile. Isabella recognized him immediately. Richard Hastings, she whispered. Your original financial architect, Caleb confirmed. The man who structured your first major funding round. Who introduced you to key investors. Who helped you build the foundation of your empire. Isabella stared at the photo, memories flooding back. Richard had been more than a business partner. He'd been a mentor, a friend, someone she'd trusted implicitly. When David had voiced concerns about some of Richard's connections, she'd dismissed them. She'd chosen Richard over her husband's warnings. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would he do this? Because you were never the goal, Caleb said quietly. You were the tool. Richard and his network needed a legitimate empire to move their money through. They needed someone brilliant enough to build something real, someone driven enough to never quit, someone isolated enough to not notice what was happening around them. So they helped me build it, then took it away. They're not taking it away. They're converting it. Travis pulled up more documents. Your company is being transformed into a massive laundering operation. Legitimate business on the surface, criminal enterprise underneath. And because it's your name, your reputation, you'll be the one who takes the fall when it all comes crashing down. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. Everything she'd built, everyone she'd trusted, all of it had been a lie. A carefully constructed trap designed to destroy her. There's more, Caleb said, his voice heavy. We found communications between Richard's network and the people who killed my wife. They're connected. The same operation. Isabella looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes. David, she whispered. Caleb nodded slowly. I pulled the accident report from 3 years ago. The investigation was closed quickly. Too quickly. And the detective who handled it received a very generous consulting contract from one of Richard's shell companies 2 months later. The room spun. Isabella stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Her husband, her friends, her company, her life, all of it orchestrated, all of a lie. Why am I still alive? She asked, not turning around. Because they still need you, Sarah answered. A dead CEO raises questions, creates investigations. But a disgraced CEO, one caught in a massive scandal, one who slowly loses control of her company while drowning in legal troubles? That's just another corporate tragedy. Isabella closed her eyes. She could see it all now, the plan unfolding in front of her. They continued tightening the noose, stripping away her power piece by piece. And when the time came, when the illegal operations were too embedded to remove, they'd expose just enough to destroy her reputation while protecting the larger network. How long do I have? She asked. Days, Caleb said. Maybe a week. There's a shareholder meeting scheduled for next Friday. They're planning to call for your removal based on evidence of misconduct they've been manufacturing for months. Isabella turned back to face them. What kind of evidence? James pulled out a thick folder. Financial impropriety, unauthorized transactions, breach of fiduciary duty. They've built a comprehensive case that makes you look either criminally corrupt or dangerously incompetent. And I can't defend against it because all my trusted executives are either dead or compromised. Exactly. Isabella sank back into her chair, the weight of it all crushing down on her. In 1 week, everything she'd spent 20 years building would be destroyed. Her reputation, her legacy, her life's work, gone. I should run, she said quietly. Disappear like you did. Start over somewhere else. Caleb crouched down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. You could. We could help you. New identity. New life. You'd be safe. But they'd win. They'd have her empire. They'd continue using it to hurt people. And Richard would get away with murdering your husband. The words hung in the air between them. Isabella looked into Caleb's eyes and saw understanding there. He knew what it meant to walk away. He'd done it himself. But she also saw something else. Regret. The cost of choosing safety over justice. What do you want to do? He asked softly. Isabella thought about David, about the life they'd planned together, about the dreams they'd shared. She thought about Richard, Linda, and Thomas. Good people who died trying to protect her. She thought about all the employees who worked for her company, unaware they were part of something corrupt. I want to burn it all down, she said, her voice steady now. Every piece of it. I want to expose Richard and everyone working with him. I want justice for David, for my friends, for everyone they've hurt. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded and stood. Then that's what we'll do. Sarah stepped forward. It won't be easy. They have resources, power, legal protection, and they have my company, Isabella added bitterly. Not all of it. Travis pulled up another screen. They control the board, most of your executives, your security. But there are still parts of your empire they haven't fully infiltrated. International divisions, subsidiary companies, assets they can't easily access. We can work with that, James said. Build a case. Gather evidence. Hit them before they hit you. Isabella felt something stirring inside her. Not hope exactly, but purpose. Fight. What do we need? Time, Caleb said. And access. They're watching you now, tracking your movements, monitoring your communications. So how do I help? You keep acting normal. Go to work. Attends meeting. Pretend you don't know anything. Caleb's expression was serious. Let them think their test worked, that you're isolated and vulnerable. Meanwhile, we work in the background. For how long? Until we're ready to strike. Isabella stood, feeling steadier now, more grounded. And if something goes wrong, then we all disappear, Sarah said simply. That's the backup plan. Always. Isabella looked around at these people who'd given up everything to fight hidden battles most people never knew existed. They'd lost careers, identities, the lives they'd built. And they were willing to risk what little they had left to help her. Why, she asked. Why are you doing this? Caleb answered. Because someone has to. Because these networks think they're untouchable. And because you gave me a chance once when I needed it most. He paused. It's time I returned the favor. Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. We haven't won. But we will. Caleb's expression was grim. We'll try. That's all any of us can promise. Isabella spent the rest of the afternoon in the warehouse, learning the details of the operation against her. Names, dates, transactions. The web of corruption was vast, spanning multiple countries and involving people at the highest levels of business and government. It was overwhelming, terrifying, but also clarifying. She finally understood what she was fighting against. As evening approached, Caleb walked her to the door. Ava sat in a small room off to the side, drawing with colored pencils, supervised by Sarah. The little girl waved at Isabella through the doorway, and Isabella waved back, her heart aching. She shouldn't be here, Isabella said quietly. I know, but I can't leave her anywhere else. Not right now. Caleb's jaw tightened. Marcus knows who I am now, or at least he's figured out I'm a threat. That means Ava could become a target. I am sorry. I never meant to put her in danger. This isn't your fault. Caleb's voice was firm. You were a victim. Now you're a fighter. There's a difference. Isabella looked at him, this man who'd walked away from everything to protect his daughter. What if it gets violent? Then I disappear again. Ava comes first. Always. I understand. Do you? Caleb studied her face. Because once we start this, there's no going back. People will get hurt. Careers will be destroyed. Some might die. They already killed David. They already killed my friends. Isabella's voice hardened. I'm not afraid of what comes next. You should be. Fear keeps you careful. Then I'm careful but not afraid. How's that? Caleb almost smiled. That works. Isabella left the warehouse as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She took the same precautions on her way home, switching cabs and doubling back. When she finally reached her penthouse, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She poured another glass of wine and stood at her window again, watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, Richard Hastings was probably celebrating, confident in his victory. Certain Isabella would fall without a fight. He was wrong. Her phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number. She almost deleted it, but something made her open it instead. Check your email. Personal account. Look for the message from your husband. See, Isabella's heart stopped. She rushed her laptop and opened her personal email, the one she barely used anymore. There, near the bottom of her inbox, was a message she'd never seen before. The sender, David Grant. The date, 3 days before he died. With shaking hands, she opened it. My love, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I've been investigating Richard and his associates. I found things. Terrible things. I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You trusted him more than you trusted me, and I understand why. He helped build your dream. But Isabella, that dream is a nightmare. Richard is using your company for money laundering, illegal investments, things I can barely comprehend. I have evidence, hidden where only you can find it. The key is in the place where we first said, I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I couldn't make you believe. But please, if something happens to me, know that I died trying to save you. I love you. Forever. David. Isabella read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. David had known. He tried to warn her, and she dismissed him, chosen Richard over her own husband. And now David was dead because she'd been too blind, too trusting, too focused on her empire to see the truth. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry. But sorrow wouldn't fix this. Only action would. She wiped her tears and picked up her phone. Sent a message to Caleb's number. I have something. Evidence David hid before he died. I need to find it. The response came within seconds. Tomorrow. Same place. We'll help you look. Stay safe tonight. Trust no one. Isabella set her phone down and stared out at the city. The powerful men who destroyed her life thought she was broken. Isolated. Finished. Tomorrow, she'd start proving them wrong. Isabella had discovered David's final message revealing hidden evidence, And with Caleb's team, she'd chosen to fight back against Richard Hastings and the conspiracy that had stolen her empire. With only days until the shareholder meeting that would strip her of control, the final confrontation was about to begin. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of secret meetings and careful planning. Isabella maintained her public facade, arriving at her office each morning with practiced composure. She attended board meetings where people smiled to her face while plotting her destruction. She signed documents her compromised executives placed in front of her, knowing each signature was being used to build the case against her. And through it all, she played her role perfectly, the isolated CEO, unaware of the trap closing around her. But at night, she became someone else entirely. The place where she and David had first said, "I love you," was a small art gallery in the historic district. They'd wandered in during a rainstorm, seeking shelter, and found themselves alone among paintings of distant landscapes. David had taken her hand and whispered those 3 words while standing in front of a canvas depicting a lighthouse on a rocky shore. Isabella had kept the gallery's business card all these years, tucked in a jewelry box she rarely opened. Caleb's team met her there after hours. Travis had worked his technical magic to bypass the security system, and they searched the gallery methodically. It was Sarah who finally found it, a small storage unit behind a false panel in the wall near the painting of the lighthouse. Inside was a USB drive in a waterproof case, along with a handwritten note in David's familiar script. For Isabella, the truth they try to bury. I love you always. Back at the warehouse, they'd spent hours reviewing David's evidence. Financial records, recorded conversations, email chains, photographs of meetings that never appeared on official calendars. David had been thorough, meticulous, building an airtight case against Richard and his network. He died before he could use it, but now his widow would finish what he'd started. "This is incredible," James had said, his prosecutor's instincts coming alive as he organized the evidence. "This is enough to bring down dozens of people, maybe hundreds. Will it hold up in court?" Isabella had asked. "If we present it right, absolutely. But we need to be strategic. Go public too early, and they'll bury it under legal motions. Wait too long, and they remove you from power before we can act." So, when Isabella had pressed, Caleb had answered. At the shareholder meeting, in front of everyone. Make it impossible to hide. Now, as Isabella stood in her bedroom on the morning of the meeting, she felt strangely calm. She'd barely slept, but exhaustion had given way to something clearer. Purpose. She dressed carefully in a navy suit, simple but authoritative. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw her husband's face reflected in her memory. Saw the 3 friends who died trying to protect her. Saw the woman she used to be before grief and isolation had hollowed her out. "I'm going to make this right," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise." Her phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. "Everyone is in position. Remember the plan. Stay strong." Isabella pocketed her phone and left her penthouse for what might be the last time as its owner. The drive to the company headquarters felt surreal. The city moved around her, people going about their normal Friday routines, unaware that in a few hours, one of the largest corporate scandals in decades would explode across the news. The headquarters building rose 40 stories into the clear morning sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the sun. Isabella had always loved this building. She'd overseen its construction, chosen every detail. It represented everything she'd built, everything she'd achieved. And today, she would either reclaim it or lose it forever. Security waved her through with polite nods. Her assistant greeted her with the usual morning briefing, unaware that Isabella knew about her betrayal. Executives passed in the hallways, their smiles plastic and cold. Isabella returned each greeting with perfect composure, giving nothing away. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the main conference hall on the 20th floor. By 1 o'clock, people were already gathering. Major investors flew in from around the world. Board members arrived in clusters, their body language tense with anticipation. Media representatives waited in designated areas, cameras ready to capture what they'd been told would be a significant corporate announcement. Marcus Hale moved through the crowd like a shark through water, shaking hands and whispering in ears. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and his smile never reached his cold gray eyes. When he saw Isabella, he approached with practiced warmth. "Ms. Grant, are you ready for today?" Isabella met his gaze steadily. "I'm always ready, Mr. Hale." "Of course you are." His smile widened. "Though I imagine today might be more challenging than most. I've faced challenges before." "Indeed you have. Though I wonder if you've faced anything quite like this." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "It's a shame, really. You built something remarkable. But every empire falls eventually." Isabella felt anger flare in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. "Is that a prediction or a threat?" "Just an observation." Marcus straightened his tie. "Enjoy the meeting, Ms. Grant. I suspect it will be memorable." He walked away, leaving Isabella standing in the hallway with her hands clenched into fists. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Not yet. Wait for the right moment. At 1:45, she received a text from Travis. "All systems compromised as expected. We have control. Ready when you are." Another message followed from Sarah. "Legal team standing by. Federal contacts have been briefed." Then Caleb. "We're here. You're not alone." Isabella looked around the hallway. She didn't see Caleb or any of his team, but knowing they were somewhere in the building steadied her. She checked her reflection in a window, smoothed her hair, and walked toward the conference hall. The room was massive, designed to hold hundreds of people. Rows of seats faced a raised platform where the board members sat behind a long table. Giant screens on either side of the room displayed the company logo and would soon show presentations and documents. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. The air hummed with whispered conversations and barely contained excitement. Isabella took her seat at the center of the board table. To her left sat Marcus and several executives she'd once trusted. To her right, more board members, all of whom had been carefully placed by Richard's network over the past 18 months. She was surrounded by enemies pretending to be allies. At exactly 2 o'clock, the chairman called the meeting to order. He was a distinguished man in his 70s named Harold Bennett, someone Isabella had known for years. He'd been appointed to the board by Richard before Isabella had even realized what was happening. "Thank you all for attending today's special shareholder meeting," Harold began, his voice carrying through the room. "We have serious matters to discuss regarding the leadership and direction of this company." Isabella sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Harold continued. "Over the past several months, concerns have been raised about certain financial irregularities and management decisions. The board has conducted an internal investigation, and we're here today to present our findings." Marcus stood and approached a podium equipped with controls for the presentation screens. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to show you is deeply troubling. We take no pleasure in presenting this information, but transparency and accountability must be our priorities." The screens lit up with financial documents. Transactions highlighted in red. Account transfers that looked suspicious even to the untrained eye. Marcus narrated each slide with careful precision, building a narrative of corruption and incompetence. Every piece of evidence had been manufactured, but it looked convincing. "Damning. These unauthorized transactions," Marcus said, pointing to one particular slide, "represent a clear violation of fiduciary duty. Millions of dollars redirected without proper board approval, without proper oversight, without any regard for shareholder interests." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed. Reporters typed frantically on their devices. Marcus continued for 20 minutes, each revelation more explosive than the last. Illegal offshore accounts, suspicious vendor contracts, payments to shell companies, and, at the center of it all, Isabella's signature on document after document. "The evidence is overwhelming," Marcus concluded, his voice heavy with false regret. "Ms. Grant has either engaged in criminal misconduct or demonstrated such profound incompetence that she can no longer be trusted to lead this company. Either way, immediate action is required." Harold stood again. We will now open the floor for discussion before calling for a vote on Ms. Grant's removal as CEO. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment when Isabella would be given a chance to defend herself, knowing she had no real defense. The manufactured evidence was too comprehensive, too convincing. They expected her to crumble, to resign quietly to avoid public humiliation, to disappear. Isabella stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned to her. Cameras focused. Silence fell. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond to these accusations." Marcus smiled, confident in his victory. Isabella walked to the podium, and Marcus stepped aside. She took a moment to look around the room, meeting the eyes of people she'd worked with for years. Some looked uncomfortable, others satisfied. A few appeared genuinely concerned. "I've spent 20 years building this company," Isabella began. 20 years of 16-hour days, of sacrifices and difficult choices, of trying to create something meaningful and lasting. She paused. "And I'd be lying if I said I've been perfect. I've made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, overlooked things I should have seen." Marcus's smile widened. She was confessing, admitting fault. This was going even better than planned. "But the evidence presented today," Isabella continued, her voice hardening, "is not a record of my mistakes. It's a record of someone else's crimes." The room stirred. Marcus's smile faltered. Isabella pressed a button on the podium, and the screens changed. New documents appeared. Real financial records showing the Shell Company network. Authentic transaction trails leading back to Richard's operation. Travis had worked his magic, bypassing their control of the presentation system and feeding in David's evidence. "What you've been shown is carefully manufactured fiction," Isabella said. "What I'm showing you now is the truth." She walked through it methodically. Each piece of David's evidence. Each connection revealed. Each lie exposed. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Cameras captured everything. Board members looked at each other in confusion and growing alarm. Marcus tried to interrupt. "This is a desperate attempt to deflect." "Sit down, Mr. Hale," Isabella said coldly. "You'll have your chance to speak." From a witness stand, security moved toward the exits, blocking them. Not company security, Isabella realized. Federal agents, coordinated by Sarah and James. This wasn't just a corporate meeting anymore. It was the opening move of a federal investigation. Isabella continued revealing the conspiracy layer by layer. The 18-month infiltration. The systematic replacement of loyal executives with compromised ones. The 3 murders disguised as accidents. And at the center of it all, the man who'd helped her build everything, then try to take it all away. "Richard Hastings," Isabella said, pulling up his photo on the screen, "used my company as a weapon, used my trust as a shield. And when my husband discovered the truth, Richard had him killed." Gasps filled the room. Marcus stood frozen at his table, his face pale. Other board members started standing, some trying to leave, others demanding explanations. "David Grant spent months investigating this network," Isabella continued, her voice breaking slightly. "He tried to warn me. I didn't listen. And 3 days before he could present his evidence to authorities, he died in what was called an accident." She pulled up the accident report, then the suspicious payments to the investigating detective. But it wasn't an accident. It was murder. Just like Richard Morrison, Linda Hayes, and Thomas Webb were murdered when they got too close to the truth. The screens filled with more evidence. Recorded phone calls. Emails explicitly discussing the elimination of threats. Financial payments traceable directly to known criminals. It was overwhelming, undeniable. Harold stood shakily, his face ashen. "Ms. Grant, these are serious accusations." "They're not accusations. They're facts backed by evidence that's already been provided to federal authorities." Isabella looked directly at the cameras. "Everything you're seeing today has been submitted to the FBI, the SEC, and international financial crime units. Warrants are being executed as we speak." As if choreographed, federal agents entered the conference hall. They moved with purpose toward specific individuals. Marcus Halle, 3 board members, 2 executives. Each was approached, identified, and informed they were being detained for questioning. Marcus tried to run. He made it 5 steps before agents blocked his path. They escorted him from the room in handcuffs as cameras captured every moment. His carefully constructed facade shattered, replaced by panic and rage. The conference hall descended into chaos. Shareholders demanded answers. Media reporters shouted questions. Board members scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Through it all, Isabella stood at the podium, watching the empire of lies collapse. Then the main entrance doors opened, and Richard Hastings walked in. The room fell silent. Richard looked exactly as Isabella remembered. Distinguished, confident, charming. He wore an immaculate gray suit and moved with the ease of someone who owned every room he entered. But as his eyes found Isabella's, something flickered there. Surprise. Then calculation. Then cold fury. Richard, Isabella said quietly. Thank you for joining us. Isabella. His voice was smooth, controlled. I heard there was some excitement. Thought I should see what all the fuss was about. How convenient, since most of the evidence I've just presented implicates you directly. Richard smiled, unbothered. Evidence can be manufactured. We both know that. After all, that's what you've been accusing others of doing. True, but I have something you don't. Isabella nodded toward the back of the room. Caleb stepped out of the crowd. He'd been there the entire time, invisible among the chaos. Now he walked forward, and beside him was an older woman Isabella didn't recognize. The woman looked terrified but determined. This is Margaret Shun, Caleb said, his voice carrying through the room. She was Richard's personal assistant for 15 years. She handled his private communications, his real books, everything he kept off the record. Richard's composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Margaret came to me 6 months ago, Caleb continued, after her daughter was threatened. She's been working with federal investigators ever since. Recorded conversations, copying files, building an airtight case. Margaret stepped forward, her hands shaking. I'm sorry, Mr. Hastings, but I couldn't let them hurt my family. I couldn't keep protecting monsters. Richard's face twisted with rage. You have no idea what you've done. Do you understand the people I work with? The reach they have. I do, Margaret said quietly. That's why I did it. Federal agents moved toward Richard. He backed away, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. When they reached him, he didn't resist. But as they led him past Isabella, he stopped and looked at her with pure venom. You were always weak, he hissed. Too soft. Too trusting. I made you everything you are, and you threw it away for what? Revenge? Justice? He laughed bitterly. You've destroyed your own company. Congratulations. Isabella leaned in close, her voice low enough that only Richard could hear. David asked me to save what we built together, not what you corrupted. I'm finishing what he started. Richard was led away, and Isabella watched him go. The man who'd mentored her, who'd helped build her empire, who'd murdered her husband. Gone. The room slowly emptied as federal agents escorted various individuals out for questioning. Shareholders left in stunned clusters, already calling their lawyers. Media representatives rushed to file their stories. Within an hour, the massive conference hall stood nearly empty. Isabella remained at the podium, exhausted and numb. Sarah approached and touched her shoulder gently. You did it, Sarah said. It's over. Is it? Isabella looked around the ravaged conference room. My company is in shambles. Half my board is being arrested. The other half will resign. Everything I built is falling apart. Everything he corrupted is falling apart, Caleb corrected, walking up beside them. What you actually built, the legitimate parts, the real value, that's still there, buried under layers of scandal and criminal investigation. For now, James agreed, joining them. But you're not implicated. The evidence clears you completely. You were a victim, not a participant. Isabella shook her head. It doesn't matter. No one will trust me to lead anymore. No investor will back me. I'm finished. Or you're free, Travis suggested quietly. Free to rebuild the right way. Isabella didn't respond. She was too tired, too overwhelmed. She'd won the battle, but couldn't see past the wreckage to any kind of victory. Caleb sent his team ahead, then stood with Isabella in the empty hall. They didn't speak for a long time, just stood together in the aftermath of the war they'd fought. Ava asked about you this morning, Caleb finally said. Isabella looked at him. How is she? Safe. Happy. She drew you a picture. A table with 3 people sitting around it. Isabella's throat tightened. That's sweet. She said you looked sad at the restaurant. She wanted to draw something to make you smile. Tears slipped down Isabella's cheeks. After everything that had happened today, it was the thought of that little girl's kindness that finally broke through her defenses. I don't know what to do now, Isabella admitted. I don't know how to rebuild from this. You don't have to know today. Today you just survived. Tomorrow you can start figuring out the rest. And if I can't. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, David left you evidence not just to catch Richard, but to free you. He wanted you to be able to start over, to build something real, something good. I don't know if I can. You already did once. You can do it again. But this time, you won't be alone. Isabella looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd risked his own safety and his daughter's future to help her fight. Why did you really help me, Caleb? The truth. Because 12 years ago, you saw something in me worth saving, and I wanted you to see that same thing in yourself. The words settled over Isabella like a blanket. She'd spent 3 years believing she'd lost everything that mattered. But maybe she'd just lost the things that were weighing her down. Maybe David's final gift wasn't just evidence. It was permission to start again. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. They left the building together as the sun set behind the glass towers. News vans crowded the streets outside. Reporters shouted questions that Isabella didn't answer. She and Caleb walked past them all, 2 people who'd faced darkness and survived. The months that followed were difficult. Federal investigations continued. Trials began. Some of Richard's network fled the country. Others took plea deals. The corporate empire Isabella had built was dismantled piece by piece, sold off to pay legal fees and settle with victims of the laundering scheme. But from the ashes, something new emerged. Isabella created a foundation dedicated to corporate accountability and transparency. She used what remained of her fortune to fund investigations into financial crimes. She gave speeches about the dangers of unchecked power and isolated leadership. She became an advocate instead of an empire builder. And slowly, carefully, she began to heal. Caleb returned to his quiet life with Ava. He'd helped Isabella fight her battle, and now he was content to step back into the shadows. But he and Isabella stayed in touch. Coffee once a week, dinners occasionally, a friendship built on shared trauma and mutual respect. On New Year's Eve, 11 months after the night that changed everything, Isabella stood outside the same restaurant where it all began. She wore a simple black dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The same host greeted her, recognition dawning in his eyes. Ms. Grant, welcome back. Thank you. Your table is ready. Isabella followed him through the dining room. People glanced her way, some with curiosity, others with respect. She'd become famous again, but for different reasons. Not as a billionaire CEO, but as the woman who'd taken down one of the largest financial conspiracies in modern history. The host led her to a table near the back. Not the corner table where she'd sat with Caleb and Ava last year. A different table, larger, with more chairs. Caleb and Ava were already there. Ava wore the same purple dress, a little shorter now as she'd grown. She jumped up when she saw Isabella and ran to hug her. You came, Ava said excitedly. Of course I came. I wouldn't miss it. Caleb stood and pulled out a chair for Isabella. As she sat, she noticed the table was set for more than just 3 people. Are others joining us? She asked. A few, Caleb said with a slight smile. Over the next 10 minutes, they arrived. Sarah and her wife, Travis with his boyfriend, James and his teenage son, Margaret and her daughter, Caleb's team, the people who'd risked everything to help her fight. They gathered around the table, greeting each other warmly, settling into chairs with easy familiarity. Isabella looked around at these people who'd become her family, not through blood or business, but through shared purpose and mutual courage. This is nice, she said softly. It is, Caleb agreed. As the evening progressed, they ate and talked and laughed. They didn't discuss the trials or the investigations or the still unfolding consequences of what they'd exposed. They talked about normal things, hopes and dreams and plans for the future. They were just people sharing a meal on New Year's Eve. When midnight approached, the restaurant grew quiet. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Isabella looked around the table at these faces she'd come to love. A year ago, she'd been alone in this restaurant, turned away and humiliated. Now, she sat surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her when standing meant risking everything. 7, 6, 5. Ava reached over and took Isabella's hand. On her other side, Caleb did the same. 4, 3, 2. Happy New Year, someone said. 1. The restaurant erupted in cheers. Champagne corks popped. Fireworks exploded outside the windows. But Isabella barely noticed. She was looking at Caleb and Ava, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt inadequate for everything they'd given her. Caleb squeezed her hand. "You don't have to thank us. Idol, you saved my life. You saved your own life. We just reminded you how." Across the restaurant, Isabella noticed a woman standing alone at the host's stand. She looked anxious, uncertain. The host was shaking his head, apologetic. The woman's shoulders sagged. Isabella watched for a moment, then stood. "I'll be right back," she said. She walked across the dining room, weaving between celebrating guests. When she reached the host stand, she could hear the conversation. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We're completely booked. I don't have a single table available." The woman nodded, blinking back tears. "Understand. It's fine." Isabella stepped forward. "Excuse me." Both the host and the woman turned to her. Isabella smiled gently. "There's room at our table. Would you like to join us?" The woman stared at her, shocked. "I couldn't possibly." "Please," Isabella said. "No one should be alone on New Year's Eve." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Isabella held out her hand. "I'm Isabella." The woman took her hand, her grip uncertain but grateful. "Karen. Welcome, Karen. Come meet my family." Isabella led the stranger back to the table where Caleb and Ava and the rest were waiting. They made room, adding another chair, another place setting. Karen sat down, overwhelmed and grateful, and within minutes was laughing at one of Ava's stories. Caleb caught Isabella's eye across the table. He didn't say anything, but his expression said everything. Proud, warm, understanding. Isabella had lost an empire, lost people she loved, lost years of her life to grief and isolation. But sitting here now, surrounded by genuine connection and hard-won peace, she realized she'd gained something far more valuable. She'd gained herself back. The celebration continued into the early hours of the morning. When it finally ended and people began gathering their coats, Isabella stood outside the restaurant with Caleb. Ava had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, tired but content. "This was perfect," Isabella said. "It was," Caleb agreed. "Same time next year." "Same time next year." Isabella looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. Somewhere up there, she imagined David looking down. Proud, relieved, at peace. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the sky. "I made it right." The wind carried her words away, and Isabella smiled. She'd started a new year alone and afraid. She was ending it surrounded by love and purpose. The journey between had been painful, but it had also been necessary. She'd learned that power without connection was just isolation, that empires built on lies would always crumble, and that sometimes the most important table you could claim wasn't in a boardroom or exclusive restaurant. It was the one where people chose to sit beside you, not because of what you could give them, but because of who you were. Isabella hugged Caleb and Ava goodbye, then walked into the night. She didn't know what the future held. Her fortune was gone, her company dismantled, her old life completely destroyed. But for the first time in years, she felt genuinely happy. And that was worth more than any empire could ever be. When someone extends kindness in your darkest moment, do you accept it? Or does pride make you walk away alone? If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales of justice, redemption, and second chances.